Welcome to a different type of video. This is not something I do, and this is not some clickbait fest about how cool it is and bro, look at me through drive-through and showing off. It's about the Ariel Atom 3S that I own. And I wanted to discuss what this car is. I'm gonna go through interior, how it works, some things that you probably never see or don't know, and what it's like to drive and some of the technical parts of it and the pros and the cons. My first experience with this car was the Atom 2. Now the Atom, obviously most people know it from Top Gear, and it was a UK designed car by Simon Saunders. His core mission was to make a driver's car that was just about that. Wasn't about everything else, just a more simplistic approach. And that's why it's so popular. That's why I believed in it. And when I had a chance to do a video on the Atom 3S, which is this car, I went to TMI, the North American manufacturer. I met the owner, I met all the people that work there, and I really had a much better respect for the whole hand-built idea. The small manufacturing, local manufacturing, it's all made in-house in the US, obviously the North American one, of course, and all the things that go into making this a special car. It's not perfect, and that's exactly by design. It's not trying to be perfect. It's trying to connect to here and here. And that's why I loved it. It's pure in its purpose. Most of the modern sports cars, and we can go down the list of all the modern ones from the Supra to the new Corvette to some of the Porsche products, they all have to be designed for a more diverse audience with comfort in mind, sound in mind, pedestrian safety in mind, emissions, fuel economy standards, and a lot of this car, because it's not particularly, and it's not marketed as that street car or street legal car, even though I have it registered on the street, they don't have to worry about some of that stuff. So there's just this purity about it that you don't find. And when you drive it, or you get in it as a passenger, you completely understand why this is so cool and special. Let's go into the interior, I'll go to the exterior and the drive, and just be prepared. This video is gonna be like 25 minutes. It's not about entertainment. It's just about kind of like what the car is. All right, the first thing, getting in the car, you're gonna put your hands on the frame, step on the seat, and slide your way in. If your seat's farther forward, you've gotta watch out for this windshield. You will blast your face on it. And if you're bigger, just make sure you have the steering wheel off. When you get in, it makes getting in and out a lot easier. So let me walk you through kind of the stuff with the interior space. It's basically you're surrounded by the frame of the car. The American version comes standard with a windshield. This car has the updated and last generation side view mirrors with LEDs indicators on them. And this has the latest steering wheel, which is the last one with the Ariel logo on it. This also has the two-piece seats, which were part of the last generation from about 2018 on, and I do have the one-piece seat, but this feels like a much more rigid seat because it's not one giant piece. And to move the seat forward and back, it requires tools, and I just have the seats in the farthest position at this point, even though this is not how I would drive. I just left it like this because I haven't driven the car. But, you know, the steering wheel just feels amazing. It's Alcantara. It has a quick release hub on it, and you have to make sure because it's got this two-stage click. And a lot of people that have gotten in this car that put the steering wheel on, they leave it loose. And I'm wondering myself, thank God they didn't crash it. But yeah, you got to click it in place. This feels like a race car cockpit. It really is. It's not a race car, but it has that feel to it because of the gauge cluster is very purposeful. It does have the things you need for the street. It has a lighting control and brights, has a dimmer, turn signals, has a menu structure to kind of reset up the dash. It is an aftermarket gauge cluster, but you can download an update for it or pay for an update so you can do data logging for telemetry on track, which I've never done. Again, this is not the car that's not what I'm using it for. It has a brake bias adjuster for the tilt and pedal box here, so you can transfer more pressure to the front, well, more versus front or back bias. And there's no brake booster. The brake booster is your leg, so you're amplifying force, but it doesn't require a lot. This does not have ABS, so you really have to understand a lightweight car, how easy it is to lock up these brakes, but it's a good training tool. Manual steering rack. So you know, this feels very direct because you can see the rod right directly into the steering rack here. And this is an extremely quick ratio steering. So all of these things are about connecting you with the car. And that's what makes this an insanely special experience compared to everything else. It's you and the car. Now there is one driver's aid, and it's part of the Honda tuning. They've added this traction control junction box. And I leave it off because I feel like that's what this car is, but there's about 6 or 7 stages here. And there's wheel speed sensors here that can detect slippage, which allows it to cut some timing to the wheel and cut power. So, you know, and I can tell you right now, if you're not an adept driver and you're not used to this type of car and how twitchy it is, if you're in the cold, when I'm talking like under 60 degrees, this car never gets traction. These tires do not get heat in them because of the weight. The weight of it is so low that you might want to leave this on if you're not used to this, or at least until you get used to it. There are acrylic side panels. I've taken them off because I wanted that more open air experience. This does have a windshield standard. It does have a wiper standard and all the lights, all the road legal things that are required to drive on the street. And the water bottle for the sprayer is under here as well. And then I had fire suppression added, and there's a nozzle here. The fire pull is here. You have to pull the pin before you go out on track, or if you're driving, I just leave the pin in just in case. But if you were going to use it, you'd pull the pin just in case, and it will spray in the engine bay as well. You see your center column here. You have your 2 brake lines that go to the back. Your brake lines are Goodrich lines, and same thing with your clutch line that runs along to the back to the slave cylinder. And then pretty much that's it, aside from the parking brakes over here on the left. And I think the only other thing is the starting procedure, so let's go over that. Now the starting procedure is not like a normal car, because it's not. There's a little plastic key fob. It looks like something out of a kid's toy with 2 little keys attached to it. That's for the locking gas cap, and that's optional, an optional extra like everything on this car. Now you need the key fob near the gauge cluster on the side to start it. I just have it zip tied up there so I don't have to ever lose it. It's so small. You have a kill switch. This is the battery kill switch on the front. Basically, this comes off, you take it with you, or you want it tethered down somewhere so it doesn't fly off. But if you leave the car, just take this with you because the car is basically disabled after that. But when you come back in, you got to turn that forward, and then that enables the battery. If you leave this parked, you definitely want the kill switch off, otherwise it'll drain it. It takes a C-Tech charger, trickle charger, which is on the passenger side, and you can tell the battery state over there. It kind of flashes 3 different colors to let you, well, it doesn't flash 3 different colors, but it'll show you, you know, which state the battery's at. You pretty much want to keep it full. So once you put the battery switch, the kill switch on, the ignition switch is by the wheel. You can hear the pump enabled and some juices flowing around back, and then there is a starter button here. Just make sure you're not in first. There is no clutch like switch, so you can just start it basically with nothing. You can hear the airbox behind you. It makes a lot of noise, and it sure smells like shit. This is a car that doesn't have 50 catalytic converters and all the things that traditional cars do, and it definitely smells like it's dumping a lot of fuel. It probably runs pretty rich, and you smell it. It's that engine, that classic engine smell. So you do not want to leave this car running in an enclosed space for any period of time. Start it up in the open air. Let it get up to temperature, and on the gauge cluster, you'll see your fuel is in liters. Full is 40. When you get to the point of needing to refill, and you're turning, and that fuel is slushing around, that number will like go from 15 down to like 2, and it'll be flashing red. So you really want to try to keep this tank as full as possible, but you can get it down on the highway down to about 6 or 7 safely. But it's a 10-gallon tank. It shows you the coolant temperature, which this car runs very cool. You have intercooler, radiator, and an additional radiator on the front of the car. And if you're in any temperature below 50 degrees, this thing never gets heat in it. And typically, to start really romping on it, you want this at about 170. So sometimes if I'm going out and it's cooler, either you want to block off one of the radiators, in the cold, or let this thing sit in idle until it hits 170 and let the gearbox warm up. Everything is about temperature management on here. But once you're out and you're really driving, it will be absolutely rare to ever have any temperature issues with this. Even running on a track day, you'll see it maybe get to like 212 in extreme heat, and then the fans kick on, or fan kicks on. You're not gonna have to worry about heat. You're gonna have to worry more about the cold, the overcooling effect of this. But really, that's about it with the gauge cluster and all about the interior. I think let's talk about some of the mechanical stuff. I had to have this aligned once. I just really wanted to have it checked. And my guy at Thalman's in Illinois, he's like, I would love to work on this every day, because there's absolutely nothing to it. You pull it on the alignment rack and everything's exposed. And that's the beauty of this car, that most everything is pretty simple to work on. There are some things that are going to be a pain in the ass, that you might have to pull the seats out and stuff like that, but you know, that's any car. There's going to be trade-offs of that. But at least with the suspension, the shock absorbers are JRI with H&R springs, and the JRI dampers were clones of kind of the Öhlins dampers that they had in the UK, which are not available in the US because they're crazy expensive. So they kind of just took the shock dyno, kind of mapped what they did with the Öhlins and their JRI setups. They are however, single adjustable. So compression and rebounds tied together. If you're really in tune with the car, you could go to the track, lower it, change the damper settings, but it gets real tricky. The aero that's on here is optional. The paint color is optional. Basically everything, like I said. The aero is expensive. Front and rear carbon wings, they are unpainted. These panels are all painted, custom colored. This has a gloss black frame. All the tubes are gloss black. So between the custom paint job, the gloss finish on the chassis, and the carbon fiber wings, it adds probably like $10,000, if not more, to the price. And it is also Suntech PPF, self-healing Suntech, that was done at the factory. It's not like Chicago Auto Pros looked at it and they're like, yeah, this is not how we would PPF a car, but it serves its purpose because this thing gets pelted with rocks. It's all exposed, so anything on it is better than nothing, but every single panel that's painted has PPF. But you can see some seams, and that's just how they do it there at the factory. So in the back, under these covers, fiberglass covers, it's all these little clips that you pull out and remove. This is the air intake box that pulls off. You can see the coolant reservoir underneath it, and this pulls off one piece where you can see the valve cover of the K24, which is the Honda motor that was out of the 9th Gen SI. So it's a 200 horsepower naturally aspirated motor that has now 365 turbocharged horsepower. And again, like I said, I think I mentioned this, it's a crate HPD motor and transmission, 6-speed manual, and Honda recommended, even with the turbo, to run 0-20. And that makes sense because this car cools itself so well. And I've never burned any oil on this car. I mean, it tends to get a little bit dark, but I mean, it makes sense if it's running a little bit more rich for safety. The main upgrade on the exterior is this has Alcon brakes. And then from there, there's an upgrade to the Alcon floating rotors and track pads. So I have the HP 60 or 65, I can't remember, the Hawk pads. And I swear the brakes you'll never have to change the pads on this car. It's so light. The car's so light, it does not go through consumables. If you run a regular Hawk street pad, the brakes do not feel as good. And you know, why would you do that on a car like this? But that's kind of the way that it's set up and its existing phase. Let's take this out on the road and I'll kind of walk you through what it's like to drive it. All right. Talked about one of the biggest things about getting into the Atom with a 5-point belt is actually getting into the car. You know, like any harness, it's a pain in the balls. So most of your time what I would do is just start the car first, to be honest. Start it, let it get up to temperature while you're getting you or your passenger bolted in. That way you have a little bit of heat in it, because here's the thing about the Atom. If you're not in a scalding hot climate, it takes a while to get heated up. So there's 3 things you gotta learn. You gotta make sure your coolant temperature is up to about 165. Again, if it's colder out, it's gonna be harder. The brake temperatures, because you're running higher temperature pads, this thing doesn't weigh anything, it's harder to get the brakes up to temperature. So you need to make sure you have some heat in the brakes. And then the biggest part is the tires. The tires never get heat in them unless you're in a really, really hot temperature. So between those three things, it can make this for a much more challenging driving experience than a normal car, because there's some safety things that go along with not being able to stop well, having no grip or traction. And then of course, you got to take care of this motor. Once you set off, just putting around, the big thing is I always wear a helmet in this car, especially with the side panels off, because your tires become projectiles. They kick up every rock. So for me, you know, I'm not doing it for this video because I'm not going far, but typically that's for a safety thing. Other than that, it feels like a regular car. I will wear gloves, not because I'm cool, but because the Alcantara wheel turns into just a disgusting mess if your hands sweat, so the gloves will help protect it. Again, I don't have that right now, but that's usually how I drove this. And then setting off, I'll just kind of walk you through what it's like driving this car. Most of the time on the street, you're stuck in traffic, big surprise, or stuck behind somebody, and that becomes a real challenge, because what you want to do in a car like this is drive it. And people in normal cars don't have that ambition. So when you get this thing going, I never start in first. First gear is too short, and then second gear is finicky. It's a Honda Trans. Sometimes it will grind, sometimes it won't. So I always start in second gear. It's actually faster. All you hear is that induction noise and that wastegate behind you. So if you go into a lower gear, like fourth, it's crazy how loud it is. This car is all about that theater, the visceral sights and sounds of everything, the rev counter flying, the flashing lights, the feeling like you're gonna lose control of this car, it's gonna kill you, is what is very fun. Once you acclimate to all of this, then you really start to appreciate a lot of the core inputs. The steering, because it's a manual rack, a really quick ratio rack, it's super fun to operate. It's one of the best feeling steering racks you're gonna get into, aside from maybe a Lotus or a go-kart or a real race car. And a lot of those race car elements are here in this. It's very similar in terms of driving experience. You know, without a helmet on, you're constantly being pelted by the elements. So if you're not in a particularly feisty mood, you know, you're not going to want to go out and constantly be battered in this thing. And that's some of the pros and the cons of having all of this connectedness, is really, you know, you're exposed to the elements. And that's one of the things that is a blessing and a curse. And you know what you're getting into buying this, obviously. You know exactly what you're getting into. It's not a big surprise. Turn signals are a toggle switch, and they do not auto cancel. So when you flip the toggle switch, you got to remember to turn it on, or you'll be like that guy on the highway. And immediately, you know, the back end is starting to move around under throttle. And sometimes, you know, it's got an LSD, it's got a limited slip, so you feel the car, you know, trying to put down the power, but you know, it feels squirrely. So you really got to be careful with your right foot in this, unlike many cars. You got to be careful with the steering. The steering rack, like I mentioned, is super quick ratio, so it does not hold a drift angle. You basically find the sweet spot and make micro corrections to keep this thing on course. You turn the wheel too much, you're going for a ride. It's going to loop itself. So this is one of those cars that if you love driving, you're gonna love all of these nuances of trying to control it. You have to stay ahead of it, and you have to understand how dynamically cars work. And that is also where it's an absolute drudgery to drive if you're not in the mood for this or tired. This car does not drive itself. It does not want to drive itself, and if anything, it wants to drive itself off the road. Oh, bruh. Oh, man. So what what else do we need to know? I think the main thing is you gotta get used to brakes, throttle, steering, engine, the tuning, the boost, the grip, and that is why this car is such a driver's car. Now, the negative parts about it are it's aero dirty, which means there was no thought to aerodynamics given in the development of this car. So once you get above like 75, 80 miles an hour, you start to feel wind resistance. You start to feel the thing getting more unstable the higher you go. We did a quick drag race between the M5 competition, the 2020, and this, and it just was like a car length ahead up to about 100 miles an hour. And you know, much is made about the speed of this, and it is very fast up to 100. But over that, you'll lose to a supercar because supercars have aerodynamics that allow that to keep pushing forward. This does not, and you better hang on, and you better keep both hands on the steering wheel because this, like I said, this thing wants to move around a lot. So I think I've really enjoyed driving this car. It's been a blessing to be able to have it, and granted, like most things in life, the idea of it sometimes is better than the reality. And car ownership, I know if you've been through car ownership a lot, you know that to be one of the biggest truths. This car was everything that I thought it was, and then some, and it's also everything that I realized that I could not tolerate in large part from a car like this. It is extremely rewarding to drive, but it is also extremely difficult. It requires 150% attention, and if you decide you're going to track this car, you're going to learn real quick that you probably want to put on those Hoosiers to get more grip, and you're constantly, you have to be ready for this thing to walk away from you. And that is where the excitement and the drudgery of driving it comes. But I'm going to leave it at that, and thanks for watching this. I know it was really long, but that's kind of an insight on owning this car.